One of the most popular superheroes to ever grace comics, movies, TV, and any other medium he's been crammed into, Spider-Man's popularity has been pretty much unwavering since his conception. Stan Lee and Steve Ditko's creation became a household name in record time, to the point where pretty much everyone knew the basics: the radioactive spider, Uncle Ben, the web slinging, and had something of a soft spot for the webhead. But popularity can breed confusion, and the image of the friendly neighborhood Spider-Man that's been thrown around doesn't always line up with the character's actual history. That's to be expected, with the sheer amount of different Spider-Men to keep track of across different universes and convoluted sagas that almost tanked entire companies. But it is important to set the record straight on a few egregious misunderstandings. I might not know how to pronounce Darkseid properly, but if there's one thing I do know, it's Spidey. I'm Josh from WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 things everyone always gets wrong about Spider-Man. Number 10. Gwen Stacy was his first romantic interest. More so than a lot of other superheroes, Peter Parker's love life is often at the forefront of his stories. Everyone knows that Mary Jane is the wall crawler's one true love, and that his first serious relationship was with Gwen Stacy, who also served as his first major crime-fighting casualty. However, while Gwen might have been the first woman Pete fell for properly, his earliest on-page flirtation with romance was actually with the Daily Bugle's Betty Brant. As is often the case, it was Spider-Man himself who ended up driving the two apart, as Brent blamed the webhead for the death of her brother and the romance died out. It was reignited briefly in the late 70s though, after Betty's marriage broke down and Pete once again started dipping his cookie into Betty's milk, raising a debate that raged for years over whether or not Spidey, our hero, was engaging in an illicit affair. Number 9. Flash Thompson was always Peter's bully. Ask even the most casual Spider-Man fan, hell, probably even the mum of a casual Spider-Man fan, and they could sum up the webhead supporting cast. You've got MJ the love interest, Aunt May as Peter's only remaining family, Harry Osborn the best friend, and of course, Flash Thompson the local bully. Of course, all of these characters have changed and grown over the decades, but Flash in particular is still often pigeonholed as simply being the meathead, the bully, the school jock vying for MJ's attention. He's far more than that though, and actually one of the most diverse supporting players when it comes to how he's being used, with stories covering his drunk driving incidents and battle with alcoholism in general to his stints as Agent Venom. It's his relationship with Peter that's the most interesting though. While he started out as a high school bully and his distaste for Peter did continue into college, the two eventually grew to find some common ground and even became best friends. Number 8. He killed the burglar who shot Uncle Ben. The story of Uncle Ben and Peter Parker is practically a tale as old as time, with pretty much anyone being capable of chronicling their relationship in perfect detail. From the "with great power comes great responsibility" speech to Peter letting a burglar escape as petty revenge on someone who ripped him off to said criminal gunning down Ben. But there's always one little detail that falls through the cracks: what Peter actually did to Ben's killer. It's common knowledge that he tracks the criminal down to a warehouse, but then what? Perhaps thanks to the original Raimi Spider-Man flick, there's the assumption that Spider-Man either indirectly or directly caused his death. However, in the original story, Peter is horrified after realizing it's the same man he could have stopped and leaves him for the police to find. Later on, there is a story where the criminal leaves jail and suffers a heart attack after being confronted by Spidey, which could admittedly have added to the idea that he was actually killed. Number 7. How his sticking powers actually work. On paper, Spider-Man's powers seem pretty straightforward. He has super strength, can stick to walls, has a spider sense to keep him out of trouble, and either fashions his own makeshift web shooters to swing around Manhattan with or develops them organically. Understanding the specificities of each individual power, however, can be a right headache. His so-called sticking abilities in particular have been spotty. Initially described as suction fingers, the ability has been represented as being possible thanks to anything from tiny hairs on his fingertips to static electricity. In the same way, just how powerful Pete's grip is often forgotten. In some origin stories, especially in the movies, the hero will be unable to control his power initially and end up accidentally sticking himself to someone's hair or something. However, the implication has always been that if he was stuck to a wall, his arms would sooner detach from his body than his fingers would detach from whatever surface they were pressed against. It's low-key one of his strongest powers, and if he really couldn't control it, he'd end up ripping the scalp off anyone unlucky enough to get their hair tangled in his grip. You just don't want to think about it. Number 6. Iron Man is his closest mentor. Now this is one that's almost entirely the fault of the MCU, as Marvel Studios have done a pretty good job intrinsically tying together the stories of Peter Parker and Tony Stark over the past few Avengers movies. It's to the point where he's become an integral part of Spidey's origin. It was Stark who gave Peter his suit, who gave him opportunities to travel America, and who brought him in to help the Avengers. Hell, a retcon even made it so that Peter actually showed up in Iron Man 2 wearing an Iron Man mask. The two do have a history in the comics, of course, perhaps most famously during the events of Civil War, where the two join sides and Tony awards Pete with the Iron Spider outfit. However, even this is far from the fatherly bond Stark and Pete shared in the movies, and at the end of that story, Pete even defects to Captain America's side. In fact, the two are often depicted as outright peers in the comics, with their relationship having none of the implications it has in the MCU. Number 5, his costume doesn't have any tech upgrades. There was a small wave of backlash surrounding the release of Spider-Man Homecoming due to Spidey's new tech-focused suit. Designed by Tony Stark, the Homecoming costume came equipped with a whole host of different gadgets, as well as its own AI system to keep the Wallcrawler company on nightly haunts. While all of this was cool, it didn't ease fans' worries that the movie was essentially going to be hijacked by Iron Man. Not only was the character himself prominently featured in the marketing, but now Spidey pretty much had his own Iron Man suit, and everyone knows his classic costume is just a bit of fabric without any fancy gizmos, right? Well, while the original suit might have just been a piece of red and blue spandex, the character has a long history of upgrading it to be more versatile and tech-orientated. Usually this is channeled into the web shooters, which have been modified to accommodate a bunch of different villains and to counteract a whole host of odd powers over time. More holistically though, Spidey has preferred a more high-tech suit in general in recent years, from Doc Ock's Superior Spider-Man to Parker Industries Spider Armor. A piece of cloth might have been enough at first, but Pete's come a long way from his DIY roots. Number 4, the Avengers never want him as a member. Historically, in both the Spider-Man comics and the movies, there's some initial aversion to Spider-Man joining the Avengers. The first time he showed up on the team on the page, a duplicate version of the hero served as the story's villain, while the second attempt ended with him butting heads with pretty much every member and then sucker punching the Hulk. However, while the hero spent much of his first few decades not really tangling with the Avengers, that all changed in the 2000s. From here, Spidey ended up joining the team for some of their biggest adventures on and off for years. And if he wasn't on the main team, he'd pop up in replacement squads like the New Avengers as a major player instead. Hell, by 2016, he was so entrenched with the team that Parker Industries was bankrolling the entire enterprise, and while he was too busy to join in the flesh, Miles Morales was drafted in as a full-time member. Number 3, emo Peter Parker ruined Spider-Man. In comparison to the original two Sam Raimi movies, Spider-Man 3 is a pretty big step down. But while the movie has its fair share of problems, the so-called emo Peter Parker is not one of them. For years, fans were waiting to see the symbiote saga brought to life on the big screen, with trailers suggesting some pretty dark things to come once Peter donned the black suit. However, in the final movie, the power of the Venom symbiote essentially just makes Pete a bit of a dick, as he shakes his hair down into an emo fringe and starts finger-gunning ladies in the street. It's unbelievably goofy, but it makes total sense in the context of the film. Fans were waiting for the black suit to really drive Peter over the edge, make him angry, violent, aggressive, the worst version of himself. The thing is, the worst version of a total doof, but a completely well-meaning and kind person like Peter Parker, is exactly what the fans got in the film. The portrayal is what the character thinks is a bad boy, an overly confident, arrogant jackass. It might not have been what everyone wanted or expected, but it's the most truthful extension of the Parker Raimi had built until that point. Number 2. His best stories are when he's in school. The classic image of Spider-Man is that of a teenage hero attempting to come to grips with his after-hours heroics while maintaining a regular life and navigating the hell that is your high school and college years. It's what instantly separates him from other major heroes. He's just a kid, someone who doesn't have it all together and goes through the same struggles as you, and then beats up dudes with 8 arms once he's gotten through them. When it comes to big screen adaptations, this has always been the preferred version of the character as well, and Marvel are constantly reiterating how committed they are to keeping the character in school. And it's true that a lot of what makes the character so special and some of his best storylines so resonant is indebted to this context, but there's so much great material to be found outside of it. In the comics especially, the regular 616 Spidey has spent way more time out of school than he has in it, and the recent PS4 game has shown how much scope there is for stories off the page and about a more experienced wallcrawler. Number 1, he's called Spider-Man. There's a hyphen. It's not Spider-Man or the Spider-Man. It's just Spider-Man. It's cleaner and correct. And I know this joke doesn't work said out loud as much as it does written down, but it's just Spider-Man with a hyphen. Done.